say your first and last name for me, please, and spell it.
My name is Danielle Land, Danielle, Land.
All right, can you talk to me about your job title and what that means for you?
So I am a postdoctoral research associate here at the Pediatric Public Health Initiative at Michigan State University. I know it's a long title. Essentially, I'm continuing the research that I did in my PhD. I did my PhD in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Iowa. I know a lot of words. But overall, my research was focused in lead in drinking water. And so I'm continuing kind of the work that I started there with Dr. Monahan and Atisha here at PPHI.
Talk to me, you just talked about Dr. Mona. She's the one in Flint who kind of started this whole movement.
Yes.
So now coming back in while you're here in Flint working with her, how has that helped you and what does that help you figure out?
Well, Dr. Mona's a rock star. We actually started working with her in 2020. I believe it was 2020. I came out here to do an internship while I was doing my PhD. And when I first got here, she said, you know, what would be interesting is if we did something like a lead and water risk score. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. What else? She's like, no, that's it. That's the idea. So then it went from this idea to we wrote a nearly $1 million grant with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and we won that in 2021. And so that funding essentially is what's funding my job here with Dr. Mona. She's one of the lead PIs on the project. So I have gotten to continue working with her, and she'll probably be stuck with me for quite a while at this point.
So talk to me a little bit about the process of lead testing, especially here in Flint.
Right, so the drinking water testing as mandated by the lead and copper rule, it's kind of complicated. The lead and copper rule is a nightmare, I think, for most people to understand. I spent my whole PhD trying to figure it out. It's confusing and it's not done in a way that's, I think, easily interpretable for most people. But the way the water is sampled for the lead and copper rule is they collect a 1st liter and a 5th liter water sample at a set number of homes that are considered to be the highest risk. So those are the homes that are most likely to have lead service lines, which is where, if there's a lead line in the home, that's where we expect most of the lead in the water sample to come from. So we collect a 1st and a 5th liter water sample from those houses, and then based on which of those has the most lead, they use that when they calculate the 90th percentile. And so, again, it's not very easily understandable, I think. But the 90th percentile is when we have, say you sample 50 homes, you order them from the lowest lead concentration that you have to the highest, and then the 90th percentile sample, the 90th highest lead sample, is the one that they decide whether or not regulatory action has to be taken. And so as long as that is at or below 15 parts per billion for now, that is when they determine if they have to do something to fix it, whether that's re-optimizing corrosion control or, removing lead pipes. Thankfully, with the lead and copper improvements, they are lowering the action level to 10 parts per billion, which I cannot believe that they're actually doing that. So it's good.
Can we move your hair a little off the mic and just rub it a little bit? There you go, perfect. Okay.
Do it all again.
No, don't have to do it again. It's fine. It was fine. It was just a few bumps, you know what I mean?
So you were talking about the parts per billion a little bit. There's been a very widespread debate on legally what's allowed and physically what should be allowed. What's your thoughts on that? What do you think the difference is between the legality and the physical?
Right, so what is safe versus what's allowed? This is probably the worst question. It's not a bad question. This is a question that we get the most, right? There is no safe level of lead exposure. The CDC put that wording out in 2012, and it's true. All these studies have shown that there is no threshold of which we see negative impacts from lead exposure. So even blood lead levels as low as 5 micrograms per deciliter in kids, as low as 2 micrograms per deciliter in kids, we see impacts on their learning ability, their IQ, and that goes on to affect their lifetime earnings later in life, right? So there's no safe level of lead exposure. That's nearly impossible to achieve, right? Because lead was so useful back in the day. You know, we put it into paint, we put it in our plumbing, we put it in our food cans. Like it's so easy to work with, it is so common that we put it in everything. And now it is so expensive to remove all of it, and we don't know where all of it is at, right? So feasibly, it is impossible to remove all of the lead in our environment. And now we're at the point where we need to remove the lead in the service lines. We don't know where all the lead service lines are. So, you know, benefits to lead and copper rule improvements is about finding, or doing like a lead service line inventory. So finding all those lines for all of the community systems out there. But then it's not just lead coming from the service lines. There's also lead in plumbing inside the house, right? So like leaded premise plumbing. And a lot of people, I think, don't think about lead that comes from there. So if we don't know where all the lead service lines are, we have no clue what houses have leaded plumbing, right? So there's no safe level of exposure. Technically, like if we think about it from a water treatment standpoint, it's nearly impossible to guarantee 0 ppb of lead in the water. So then they picked 15 parts per billion, right? That's that regulatory action level you keep hearing about. Why 15 parts per billion? Do you know why 15 parts per billion? It was a randomly selected number in a way. So they chose 15 as a way to, they decided that was a level that kind of indicated a system-wide lead leaching, right? They said this is the level that indicates that there's some lead overall in the community. There's been a lot of debate, obviously, about that 15 ppb. I also think it's too high. I never thought that they would actually lower the action level, so 10 parts per billion, I'm like, okay, this is good, it's the right step. It should be lower, right? So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is what I guess governs or regulates bottled drinking water. So your tap water is mandated by the EPA, bottled water is by the FDA. Again, we're gonna throw some more wrenches in there just to make it more confusing for everybody. The regulatory level for bottled water is 5 parts per billion, right? So I think, personally, my views do not reflect those of the, the university. That action level, realistically, I think 4 or 5 parts per billion would be more of a health-based standard. Either way, we need to set a health-based water standard. But 0 parts per billion is just not, there's no way, right?
What's the difference between, say, 10 or 15 and 4 or 5? Is there a health, what's the health reason?
That's a great question. So, that's a really good question. So the idea of it being lower is that there's just a lower threshold of which they start to implement action rather than just waiting for it to get higher and higher. To give like a dose response rate, I cannot, right? Because it's so hard how each child and how each body is going to react to a dose of lead. It depends on many different factors, like your nutrition. Nutrition's a big one, that's the one that's coming to mind. But how a child metabolizes. So dose response wise, there's not a great answer to 4 and 5 versus 10. But again, it's more so that the threshold is just lowered.
I mean, talk to me a little bit about, obviously, there's no safe level of lead. We figured that out. There's been a lot of testing about it. You agree with it. What do you think when, this whole crisis first happened, the government originally told Flint citizens that it was safe to drink, completely good to go, and then very shortly after they found out, well, that's not the case. So now knowing that there is no safe level of lead, some Flint citizens still refuse to drink the water. What do you think? How do you think the trust plays into that of trusting the government and trying to get, citizens back to trusting everybody?
Mm-hmm. So, kind of what we're talking about is tap water avoidance, right? We have research papers, not me, there are research papers that have been published that actually show the tap water avoidance across the country increased after the Flint water crisis, right? It's not just Flint that said, I'm not gonna drink this water. It was nationwide. We saw especially there's a widening racial disparity in tap water avoidance. So Black and Hispanic households are more likely to drink bottled water, thus avoiding drinking their tap water, because they do not trust their tap water. which is valid. Would you? I would not. That's, the whole point of any drinking water regulation, any regulation really, is that we guarantee it's safe, right? But in Flint, especially over time, there was already this eroding loss of trust. And then we had the water crisis, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back in a way, right? So at this point, it's all about rebuilding that trust, because we don't want families spending so much money buying these alternative sources of water, right? Bottled water costs, I think, around 2,000 times more than tap water. A lot of times, bottled water is just tap water, and they just market it differently. I forgot the question.
You're good.
Edit.
How do you do that? How do you rebuild the trust? What things are you doing to rebuild
That's a great
trust?
question. That's a hard question to answer, right?
Even though you didn't break it, which is another interesting thing.
So I think at this point, once you lose trust, that is one of the hardest things to gain back, right? And so for the community of Flint, it's working with the community and doing programs like the Flint RX Kids programs to show that we are invested in improving the community here and that we are here for the long haul, right? It's not just when the cameras stop rolling, it's been this whole 10-year span. So Dr. Mona launched the Pediatric Public Health Initiative. Our whole mission is to improve Flint kids' outcomes, improve their lives, right? So I think investing in those communities, being vocal towards these other institutions especially, and helping to elevate their voices is really one of the ways that we can rebuild trust. And again, it's so hard. It is a very difficult thing to do.
Where are the levels at now? What do you see?
So I looked it up today. The lead and copper rule compliance levels. So Flint has to measure every 6 months. They're on that 6-month sampling plan. They have been, so this past sampling period, they were at 10 parts per billion. And then before that, it was 9, 8, and then 10 again. So the last 2 years, it's been right around 10 parts per billion, which, I see those levels and I'm like, uh-oh, the action level is going to be lowered to 10. And again, you have to exceed 10 parts per billion for regulatory anything to kick in. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, no, don't worry about it. We put it out here. We figured that we keep track, so don't worry. When will the new EPA law kick in?
I believe I saw October 2024, but I believe that's being pushed back because there's no way, right? They just closed the commenting period for the law, so when they put out a new regulation, they have to keep it open for the public to submit comments, like what they think about it, what things they can improve or needs to be cut. So I believe 2024. Security squad's real chatty.
Let's go back to the science part of this for a minute. This is the science communication part of this, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you tell people that this level is safe now, or this is what we're doing, when you have to go talk to them, right? How do you convince them that, okay, this is okay now to drink?
Ooh. I don't normally have to talk to the public. Because that is such a hard question or anything to really talk to people about. Because again, I'm like, oh, you're the 90th percentile in this community is 10 parts per billion. And they're like, that's not safe, is it? Because this says no safe level. So when you're speaking with the public, it's very much, I avoid using phrasing of it's safe to drink, right? You kind of lean more towards it meets regulations. So, but here, when you're already talking to a community that's so scared of their water, that's not comforting. Does not placate anyone. So I think that's why, Dr. Mona and then the rest of our Flint Registry Squad is so important, because they're really on the kind of the front lines of communicating with everybody about these.
When you do see people in the public, or you're out testing, or do you actually go out and do the testing yourself, or you just take the information?
I just look at the data.
Okay, you just look at the data.
I'm behind the computer, if you can't tell.
That's fine. No, that's okay. When you, I guess when you do interact, or your researchers interact, what do they hear from people when they go in to get tests? Anything, any stories or any?
I don't have any stories.
Okay, fair enough, okay.
So they're like the regulatory sampling,
Yeah.
from my understanding, they get boxes from the Eagle. Is it Eagle now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
So then they
Eagle
do the
sends out
sampling.
kits, Tell them how to do it.
Yes, there's like a sheet of instructions. Yep.
Do you know how many tests, so like they get tested every 6 months, how many actual kits are going out or need to come back for a sample, do you know?
Right. It's so based on the size of a system, a community water system, they have to sample a certain amount. So Flint is a large water system, so they have to collect 100 samples. But from what I saw in their most recent report, it was like 72 or something of that sort. So they're collecting in the 50 to 100 range.
Okay. Okay, anything else you guys can think of? Anything else we're missing? Anything else you want to add? Anything?
No, but I'll probably think of it. I'll wake up in a sweat
Okay.
tonight.
Hit me with an email if there's something you think we need to
Okay.
add, seriously, because we're just trying to figure this out. Okay. I guess I might ask this question again. We kind of asked it earlier. So reconciling safe water and legal water, that's a tough challenge, right?
Yes. Yes.
Tell me about that again, please.
Like, repeat some of the stuff I already said?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay, just making sure. Oh, no, now I'm panicking. Look what you've done, Randy.
What's that?
I said, look what you've done, now I'm panicking.
Don't be panicking. You're fine. Yeah.
So we have there's the action level of 15 parts per billion, right? The maximum contaminant goal level, which is more health-based, is 0. The EPA says it's 0. Realistically, we cannot achieve 0. So that's
Okay, I'll stop you there. I'm going to rephrase my question. How difficult is it as a researcher to reconcile that difference, right? To have to, deal with these numbers knowing that it may not be the safest, but the government says this is okay. How hard is that to reconcile that as a researcher and a human?
like emotionally.
Yeah.
We go, ooh. So when we have our tap water samples running on the instrument, and you're tracking it on the computer to see kind of what's coming out, I'll see water lead levels that are, you see like 11 or 12 ppb, and okay, their 15th, their 90th percentile is going to be lower than 15. But there's people drinking that, right? And then, a lot of times, if you know that there's like young children in the house, emotionally, morally, it's difficult, because we know what lead does, right? The science is very clear. It's been clear for a long time that there's no safe level of lead, that lead is dangerous, that it hurts a child's outcomes, that follows them through their life. It's one of the main risk factors for cardiovascular disease. There's been studies that have been published that are saying 400,000 something deaths in the United States are attributable to chronic low-level lead exposure, some of that coming from drinking water, right? So it's heartbreaking, right? It's because there could be an infant who's, their bottled water is formulated, or not their bottled water, their formula is formulated from that tap water. And then, with the lead and copper rule, the notifications to the public are, it's not something that's required to do necessarily if they don't have an exceedance. So maybe the people who live in the house that have that decently high lead level won't know. So it's hard to see and to look at and get those results.
Why did you do lead? Why did you pick lead? Why are you in Flint? Why? That's an interesting. Someone from Missouri. Why did you pick this to do?
So I actually wound up in Iowa for my bachelor's. While I was there for undergrad, I started doing water sampling for agricultural contaminants. And then I went into this graduate program that was all around sustainable water development, right? So clean water. The lab that I went to, they had just started looking at lead in Iowa's water. And so I had joined the lab. That's the project I started on, right? That's kind of, when you're a PhD student, it's more so what your PI is doing. So it's not necessarily that I'm like, I want to do lead. It's kind of how I kind of wound up doing lead in water in Iowa. And then Dr. Mona just happened to visit at the College of Public Health at the University of Iowa, and me and my research partner at the time, my PI, met with her. And then Dr. Mona is like the easiest person to talk to and become best friends with. So my advisor at the time, Michelle Scherer, essentially asked Dr. Mona if I could come out to Flint to do an internship with her, and I had to do that for my PhD. And she is an educator first, as she likes to say. So she's like, oh yeah, come out here. And so then I drove under the famous wrought iron Flint Township sign that I had always read about in articles, because when you start out reading about lead, especially at that time, it's all about Flint, right? So a lot of the stuff that I had learned was all these articles on Flint. And then to be here it gets disorienting sometimes, especially, coming up on the 10-year anniversary from when the crisis started. I think that's what's beautiful about even the RX Kids program, the launch is tomorrow on Valentine's Day, a day of love, is we really want to kind of rewrite the perception of Flint. It's not a broken community. We want to celebrate the love we have for our community and really work to rebuild that trust and invest in our families here to rebuild, kind of how everyone sees Flint. Like, we are going to lead the nation in poverty research with this program, right? We are leading the nation in our drinking water research and how aging infrastructure and how water quality changes affect the community, right? Yeah.
You think the perception is changing?
Yes, I do. Because, Flint, I've always hated this sentence. I don't know if you should use it in here, but I've heard that, like, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I've always hated that, but it's true, right? In a lot of ways, we hear a lot, when we speak, we want to say something like, we want to make sure Flint never happens again. But it's happened again, right? Our infrastructure is old. It's falling apart in a way, and you see more and more communities coming up on headlines. Newark, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, all these other places that are having high levels of lead and trying to reconcile, well, what do we do about that? And now we have the lead and copper rule improvements. So the first update to the lead and copper rule, the first major update for the first time since it was put out there in 1991. All this really came around because the Flint water crisis really reignited everyone's interest in lead and water, right? Because the community here was adamant about making change, and yeah, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. That's great. Okay. You did wonderful. Anything else, guys, you could think of?
I heard you mention something about poverty research. Can you go further into that?
Right, so the Flint RX Kids program is a cash allowance program that will be given to pregnant mothers. There'll be I believe a $1,500 one-time payment while they're pregnant, and then a $500 cash payment every month for the first month of a child's life, right? The idea is, as Dr. Mona says, it's a prescription for poverty. So to help lift these families out of poverty. The reason I say that we're going to lead the nation in poverty research is because we're going to see how, at the community level, this kind of program changes childhood poverty here. So I believe 34% of children in Flint live in poverty. I believe 50% of children in Flint live in poverty. The overall poverty rate, I believe, is 34%. And so, you know, in a way, we have almost a case study of sorts to see how these kind of cash payments at this level can make a change to outcomes, right, and families.
Have you found that in your research that these lead problems follow poverty?
Lead is the poster child of environmental injustice. So when we see communities in poverty, you're going to find lead. So older homes are more likely to have leaded plumbing, lead service lines, leaded paint. They're also less likely to be able to mitigate those issues. So less likely to be able to afford remediating the lead in the paint, less likely to be able to afford filters to filter out their water or replace their plumbing.
Hold that thought. I'm going to quiet it down real quick. This is Michael. I picked this spot.
They're going to be like, who are you?
You're doing really good though, like really, really
My
good.
mouth is so dry. Fight, fight, fight.
He has to do this all the time. He's from Flint. He grew up in Flint, so he's literally been around.
He's got that.
He loves the city, so he knows like everybody too.
That is
It's
so
crazy.
funny.
Walking on the street, and he just talks to people. I'm like, man, I don't even know how to do that.
I'm like, I'm an introvert. Good for you, though.
Never see, not see, recognize at least one person.
That is so funny. Then I get here and everyone's like, who are you? I'm like, I've worked here for a year.
All right, can we finish your thoughts on poverty and lead there real quick?
Damn.
You're talking about how it follows it because of, they can't mitigate the circumstances, that kind of thing. So I guess we'll just re-ask it real quick. And, a place like Flint in poverty, dealing with poverty and dealing with lead on top of that, how hard is that to turn around, right? You're kind of in that business of turning this around. How hard is that to take a community like this that's been hit with lead, hit with poverty for so long? How hard is that?
Right. So there has been a lot of research done on the health effects of poverty, right? Literally a lower lifespan associated with how much money your household makes. And you know, Flint is a community that has not been invested in since it was really established, right? So to turn it around, it takes investing, it takes putting the money in, and it takes trying to clean the lead up, right? And what we see is people and families in poverty, they're not only exposed to lead on top of things, there's all these other contaminants and other things that they're more likely to be exposed to. So we see socially vulnerable communities are more likely to have Safe Drinking Water Act violations, right? So literally less likely to have water that is safe for them to drink, right? Not just lead, but also bacterial contamination or other things.
Okay, good. All right, anything else? Do I keep saying that? Okay, cool. All right, so now we're just going to leave that on for a second. We're done with questions. Exhale. You did great. You did great. You did great. Yeah, so we're going to get a couple setup shots, right? So where we introduce you,